March 22, 1945, 10:37 in the evening. The banks of the Rhine near Oppenheim stretched dark and cold beneath a moonless sky. General George S. Patton Jr. stood in a command post, studying maps illuminated by kerosene lanterns. Around him, engineers worked in controlled silence, assembling assault boats, nothing elaborate, nothing rehearsed in the way that modern warfare had come to demand. What happened in the next 2 hours would reshape how military commanders understood the meaning of preparation, and it would force Winston Churchill to confront a question he had avoided since 1942. Which nation now truly led this alliance? To understand why Patton's decision mattered, you must first understand what had been promised to someone else. In January 1945, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery stood before Churchill with a vision of redemption. For months, Montgomery had been overshadowed by American commanders. While Patton raced across France while American forces bore the heaviest casualties, Montgomery had fought for recognition of a different kind of warfare, one built on meticulous preparation, overwhelming firepower, and the elimination of human waste. Operation Plunder would be his vindication. 2 months of planning, 1 million men, 25,000 vehicles, 3,500 artillery pieces, airborne drops synchronized to the minute, smoke screens. Amphibious assaults across the Rhine coordinated with the precision that only the British military establishment could orchestrate. Churchill had made it personal. He would attend. War correspondents would document it. History would record Operation Plunder as the moment when British professionalism reasserted its dominance over American improvisation. The date was set, March 24, 1945, 48 hours away when Patton made his phone call to Eisenhower. But before that moment, consider what the men in both armies expected to experience. German soldiers defending the Rhine knew the war was lost. The Soviet advance from the east was unstoppable. American and British forces pressed from the west. Yet they held the Rhine because it was the last natural barrier. And in desperation, soldiers often fight hardest when defending the final position. They expected a crossing like Normandy, tremendous bombardment, visible airborne operations, the gathering of forces so enormous that German command could see it coming and concentrate their defense. This expectation shaped how they deployed their remaining reserves, where they positioned their engineers, which routes they chose to defend. The assumption was that modern warfare advertised itself. American soldiers under Patton expected something different. They had learned from their commander that speed dissolved caution, that when the enemy prepared for a massive operation, a small one could slip through the gaps. Patton's command philosophy was not new, but in March 1945, it was about to collide directly with Montgomery's. Patton's crossing at Oppenheim was not random. His Third Army had been advancing for weeks, pushing hard against German positions that were fragmenting under the pressure. Intelligence reports indicated that German forces were thinly stretched, their attention focused on the massive concentration of British and Canadian forces preparing Operation Plunder to the north. At Oppenheim, the Rhine was narrower. Intelligence suggested German positions were light. Patton's question to his commanders was simple: why should we wait? The operation began at night with assault boats, small, maneuverable craft that could be assembled and launched with minimal preparation. Engineers worked with practiced efficiency. By midnight, the first wave had crossed. By dawn, more than 4,000 American troops held the eastern bank. Casualties were fewer than 30. The bridgehead expanded. Patton's instinct had proven correct. The gap existed because German command was watching Montgomery's preparations to the north and had stripped resources from other sectors. At 10:47 on the morning of March 23rd, Churchill's aircraft descended toward an airfield in Germany. Montgomery waited on the tarmac. In the aircraft, Churchill had received confirmation of what had happened. American forces had crossed the Rhine, not in Operation Plunder's carefully orchestrated moment, not with Montgomery's artillery preparation. The night before, with boats and speed and the willingness to move when opportunity appeared. The radio message from Montgomery that Churchill read during descent contained the request that would reshape the final months of the war. Patton must be relieved of command for insubordination. What made this moment so politically significant was that Montgomery's complaint was not entirely without merit. Patton had not coordinated with Montgomery. He had not informed British command. He had violated the protocols that held the alliance together. In a properly organized military structure, such insubordination demanded consequences. Yet in the brutal mathematics of coalition warfare, Patton had achieved the objective with one night and minimal casualties, while Montgomery prepared to invest 2 months and enormous resources for the same crossing. Churchill descended the aircraft stairs and met Montgomery's expectant face. The Field Marshal was rigid, professional, and deeply wounded. His operation, the Operation Churchill had personally championed, was about to be overshadowed by an American general's gamble. Montgomery believed this reflected not just on him, but on the question of whether British military methods could still shape the conduct of the war. The conversation between Churchill and Montgomery was not recorded, but historical documentation from both men's later writings and from observers present suggests the substance of their exchange. Churchill listened to Montgomery's case for Patton's removal. He acknowledged the validity of the protocol violation, but he asked one question that Montgomery could not answer satisfactorily. If success is the measure, why should success be punished? Montgomery argued that discipline was paramount. A coalition military without command authority was chaos. Patton's unauthorized crossing set a precedent that endangered the entire structure. Churchill understood this argument intellectually, but something deeper troubled him. He had spent 3 years defending Montgomery's methods against American criticism: careful preparation, minimal casualties, professional excellence. These principles had merit. But watching an American general cross the Rhine in one night, while the British required 2 months, forced Churchill to confront what he had been avoiding. The decision Churchill made that day was not recorded as a dramatic statement, but it was absolute. He would not demand Patton's removal. Instead, he sent word to Eisenhower that American forces should continue advancing. Operation Plunder would proceed. Montgomery's crossing would happen, but it would no longer be the main story. The consequences of this decision rippled through the alliance. Montgomery felt personally betrayed. British military leadership protested that precedent and discipline had been sacrificed for expedience. Patton understood clearly that his insubordination had been rewarded because it succeeded. The message sent to American commanders was unmistakable. Results matter more than protocol. What made Churchill's choice so significant was what it revealed about the shifting power dynamics within the alliance. For 3 years, Churchill had been the senior political figure in a relationship where British forces were numerically significant and militarily competent. But by March 1945, American forces outnumbered British forces. American casualties had become the dominant factor. American industrial capacity sustained the entire operation. And now an American general had demonstrated that American operational doctrine, faster, less cautious, more willing to accept risk, could achieve results that British doctrine required months to accomplish. In his private reflections after the war, Churchill was remarkably honest about the implications. The speed at which Patton moved would have been considered reckless in earlier campaigns, but in the final months of warfare against a collapsing enemy, speed had become the primary virtue. The Germans could not organize coherent counterattacks against movements that appeared without warning. They could not concentrate reserves against forces that advanced before expected. Patton understood this. Montgomery, trained in a different school of warfare, had not fully adapted to it. The symbolic weight of who crossed first mattered more than military tacticians typically acknowledged. In alliance warfare, precedence carries meaning. Being first suggests not just tactical advantage, but strategic validation. Patton's crossing first meant that American methods had proven themselves superior in this crucial moment. Montgomery's Operation Plunder, when it occurred, was still a masterpiece of coordinated force, but it was now the second crossing, the follow-up operation, the supporting action rather than the main effort. This reordering of roles would shape the final push into Germany. American forces, validated by Churchill's tacit approval, would increasingly set the pace. British forces, still competent and necessary, would now operate in a supporting role. The alliance would function, but its internal hierarchy had shifted decisively. The deeper question Churchill grappled with was whether British military doctrine itself had become obsolete. For decades, the British approach had emphasized careful preparation, overwhelming firepower applied against a positioned enemy, and the minimization of casualties through superior organization. These principles had served Britain well when Britain possessed clear military superiority. But in a coalition where the Americans provided 70% of forces and the majority of resources, the American willingness to move faster and accept higher risk for the sake of speed had become strategically superior. What Patton exposed was not that British methods were wrong, but that they were insufficient for the pace of modern warfare when the enemy was collapsing. The Wehrmacht could not defend everywhere. It could not respond to multiple simultaneous crossings. The side that moved faster accumulated advantages that the side that moved carefully could not overcome. Patton grasped this intuitively. Montgomery had to learn it through the uncomfortable experience of being outmaneuvered by a rival. In the weeks following the Rhine crossing, the pattern accelerated. American forces pushed rapidly eastward while British forces consolidated their positions more carefully. Both were fighting the same war, but they were fighting it at different speeds. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the Americans had advanced further and faster than anyone predicted possible. British forces had fought competently and suffered heavily, but they had not set the pace. Churchill never publicly acknowledged that his decision represented a broader acceptance of American military leadership. To do so would have been to admit that British military methods, whatever their merits, had been surpassed. But in private correspondence with Eisenhower after the war, Churchill's language became clearer. He acknowledged that Patton's crossing had forced him to recognize that the future of warfare belonged to commanders who understood that speed, even at the cost of some caution, was the primary weapon against a disintegrating enemy. The historical irony is that both commanders were right. Montgomery was correct that Patton's crossing violated protocol and command structure. A properly functioning military organization required coordination and hierarchical authority. Patton was correct that in the specific circumstances of March 1945, with Germany collapsing and time favoring the Soviets, speed mattered more than perfect preparation. Churchill chose to prioritize victory and speed over the defense of protocol and British prestige. What this moment teaches about alliance warfare is that shared victory often requires the sacrifice of national pride. Churchill could have supported Montgomery's demand for discipline and been vindicated by the logic of military organization. Instead, he chose to accept the reality of shifting power relationships and the evolution of military doctrine. American forces had learned to move faster than British forces could match. Rather than punish that success, Churchill allowed it to continue. The Rhine crossing of March 1945 was not a turning point in the military sense. The outcome of the war was already determined, but it was a turning point in the political sense. It marked the moment when the leadership of the Western Alliance publicly acknowledged, if only implicitly, that America had become the dominant military power. Britain would remain essential, but Britain would no longer set the terms. In the end, Patton's unauthorized crossing represented more than insubordination. It represented the future. Speed, risk-taking, and the willingness to move without complete preparation would define modern warfare. The careful methods that had sustained British military excellence for generations would remain valid in certain contexts, But they would no longer be sufficient. Churchill recognized this, however reluctantly, and made a choice that reflected not what made him proud, but what won wars. The general who moved fastest crossed first. The empire that had once defined military excellence was learning to follow.